okay, you have to tell me if there's life after death. If you can hear me, you need to give me a concrete sign that I will recognize. And I don't know, maybe 2, 3 weeks went by. This particular night, I was woken up in the middle of the night and I was in a lucid state. I wasn't completely awake, but I had a voice telling me to write down a phone number. And I scribbled this phone number down, which when I woke up, didn't remember doing this. It felt like it was part of my dream or in my dream. And I woke up in the morning and I looked over and I said to my partner, I said, do you know what is this phone number? It's obviously my writing. I don't remember writing that. And then I remembered it sort of in the middle of the night. There was a voice telling me that it was important. I remember the word important. Write down the phone number. So I called the phone number.
Welcome to What the Fuck Just Happened. I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listen to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I will be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird shit. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the fuck just happened? Hi guys, I'm talking with Krista, and she reached out to me on email after reading some of What the Fuck, and she's just a completely grounded, normal person who was pretty blown away by some what the fuck things that happened to her. And which I think kind of shows that just ordinary people have these experiences all the time. So she can introduce herself.
Okay, hi. I'm just an ordinary person who, yes, have had some really odd experiences in the last 5 or so years that changed my mind about, I guess, the existence of our consciousness surviving our bodies after death. And it's thrown me into, researching the topic because I'm a researching kind of person. I have to research everything. I've always been that way. And like Liz, I've found some interesting things that are really enlightening. So I guess that's why I'm here today. Is that right?
That is, what were your original thoughts most of your life about what happens after we die?
I'll go back to my childhood, which was my dad was pretty much an atheist. He was an engineer, so he was very science minded, very logical. And my mother, who would have had influence on me, got sick when I was very young. She was Catholic. She grew up in Catholic orphanages, and her parents were Italian immigrants. So they were very Catholic. And she believed, but I think she kind of, because of the time it was in the 60s and 70s, she went along with my dad. He didn't want to go to church, so she wasn't going to go to church. So I didn't have that influence at all. So to answer your question, I pretty much didn't give it a whole lot of thought. I thought religion was sort of a bunch of man-made crap. I think there's a lot of good messages in religion, but I felt similarly to what my dad had said, which is I don't need to go to church to be a good person. And that's sort of the attitude I took on most of my life. So that was sort of my background growing up until even when my mom passed. My mom passed when I was 20. And you would have thought back then I would have, launched myself into, is there life after death, but that it didn't for some reason. She was sick for 15 years, and it was more of a relief when she passed. So I don't know. Does that answer your question a little bit about my background?
It does. Yeah, it sounds like actually we were fairly similar in what we thought. Religion was just either completely man made and complete nonsense or a culture, but nothing beyond that.
Right. And I do remember some of the neighborhood moms when my mom was in the hospital a lot. I went with their kids after school. It was called CCD. It was like I don't even know what it stood for, but it was like classes for children about God and church and whatever. And I remember asking very logical questions and annoying the instructor.
I think I would have done that if I'd ever been sent to actually try it to religious schools.
Yes. So it was just, I was asking too many questions, just sit back and listen. So I was that kind of kid. And so I ended up falling asleep after school in all these classes. So that was pretty much the extent of my education on religion.
I think we would have been friends as little kids, it sounds like. And it's just one thing that I think so many people just don't realize is that religion and afterlife, I mean, they're two completely different things. I mean, I don't even think of religion tied into this. It's just so much of what we're taught is that
Right.
religion, afterlife. When I often mention that I've started researching afterlife to people, they'll be like, oh, you mean like God? Or they'll say, I don't believe in God or heaven. I'm like, well, I don't believe in God or heaven either. This is just a lot more about science and consciousness and the study of consciousness. So, yeah, to me, the two are just completely different things, except that they've been intertwined in a fable type of story.
Well, that's what fascinates me now is sort of that merging now of science and spirituality. And yeah, that's what interests me a great deal. That's what kind of forced me into delving into this topic.
What happened that made you start to look, and what was the first thought you had that even motivated you to look?
Well, I was giving that some thought because I thought, okay, how did this all start? What was it? And the very first thing I remember was when one of my dogs died in 2010. And it rocked my world because while I had lost other dogs, his particular death was really sudden. Like he was here one day, gone the next. I didn't have time to slowly prepare myself for this. And he got some sort of weird infection and got sepsis and was gone within like 24 hours of us taking our last walk, where he was perfectly fine. So I was just really rocked by that. And what was interesting was, okay, so that threw me in kind of into a little bit of a depression. And I remember, now this was in retrospect, and this was a weird thing that happened, and it never happened to me before. It was back when we had digital cameras that had the little flashcards you put in there. It wasn't that long ago. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So it was a digital camera, not a film camera. And it was, I remember very vividly now because I have the photo. It was August 15th of 2010, and he died August 20th of 2010. And I had just gotten out of our hot tub. It was we used it as a swimming pool in the summer. It was really hot, and I had come in and I had taken my jeans off and thrown them on the ground. And I came back in, and he was laying down on my jeans on the floor, and he looked just adorable. So I had my camera sitting right there, and I thought, oh, I'll just take a quick picture of him while he's looking adorable there. And he was like he was a little Boston Terrier that looked like a French bulldog. And I went to take the picture, and my partner was with me, and she saw this whole thing happen. The camera started doing this really weird thing and clicking on its own, and then it got stuck. And I remember saying, that's weird. My camera's never done that. So I tried taking another photo, and it did the same thing. And then it just took a shot. And the photo was of the jeans on the floor, but just he was missing from the photo. I didn't think a whole lot of it.
And he was lying on the jeans and he just didn't show up in the photo.
That's the only thing that didn't show up. And the photos had this weird, like, kind of translucent, weird. I can show you the photo at some point. But yes, the only thing missing from the photo was him. And like I said, I didn't think a whole lot of it until he died 5 days later. And that was the last photo I ever took of him. And he wasn't in it. And I still to this day think it's never happened to me again. I've used that camera, at there after for a couple years. And it was just an odd thing to me. I felt like it was almost a sign. And I've had other people look at the photo. I've had actually some people that are more like medium type people, and I didn't tell them anything about the photo. I just said, look at this photo and tell me what you think about it. That's all I've said. And three of them, three different people said the same thing. I see a dog laying on the photo, sleeping. Like they could see that. And I said, but there's no dog in the photo. They said that's just what they see, but not like physically see, like they see in their head. So that was the first weird thing, just weird thing that ever happened to me. But as years went on, I thought, okay, it just sort of fades and you just think, okay, it was just whatever. It was just an electronic glitch that happens. That was what I thought. And then during that time, there was a show on. I was doing a lot of polyurethaning on the house. I was doing a lot of home improvement shows. Home improvement to my house. And I was watching shows on TV. And one of the shows back then was called I Survived Beyond and Back. And it was all about near death experiences. So I just thought that was really fascinating. And I'm kind of giving you, I guess, a chronological order of how I got here today. So that intrigued me. And then I started reading some books on near death experiences. And, I dove into that subject for a while. And then I wrote this all down so it would just be bullet points for you because that's how I do things. And then in 2012, so this was like about a year or so later, after the dog photo and me kind of opening my mind up to things, just being a little more open to things, right? Not as shut down about Afterlife. I was doing, a mundane task, laying sod, right? So I was just sort of out there laying sod and just, spacing out. And this voice, oh, I'm sorry, let me back up to this one because this one was pretty significant. So Oscar dies, and then we get another pup, Louie. And I was cleaning the hot tub out. So this was September of 2010, a month after the thing happened with the photo. And I always make sure the hot tub steps are rolled away from the hot tub and the lid's closed at all times when we're not out there because of the dogs. Well, I was cleaning it out and refilling it and scrubbing it, and I had just waxed the top of it. And Louis was a French bulldog, and he was, I don't know, maybe 10 weeks old now, 12 weeks old. And I turned around just for a moment to hose off the filter. And I was hosing out the filter, and a voice shouted in my head. It was not my own voice. And I know this sounds really weird. It wasn't my own voice, and it was not my own thought. I did not create this thought. And I don't know how any other way to put it, but the voice said hot tub and it shouted. And I can't tell you if it was a male voice, a female voice. It was just a voice. And I turned, and he was in the water paddling with his head up frantically. He had slipped. He went up the steps and slipped on the waxy edge. And French bulldogs can't swim anyway because they're like cannonballs. But I whatever this voice was saved my dog. And I had just lost my other dog. And I'm so conscientious when it comes to my pets. So I almost just, to this day, I can't believe that happened and I allowed that to happen. But it was just like a second I turned my back. So again, these things didn't mean a lot to me until retrospectively when I look back now because they've all added up.
I remember I had one weird experience with my cat. Actually, I had a few, but it makes me think of it was shortly after college, and I was looking for an apartment in New York, and I was subleasing a room from one of my friends there, and I didn't. I'm from New York, but I didn't feel like living with my parents because my friend had this room, and I don't know why, but I woke up just suddenly, like I'd had the window in the room open and wondered. I was like, I wonder if this is open too wide, but I think it's okay because I had my dog and cat there. And I don't know why. I woke up at 4 in the morning and looked at I was really calm. I just woke up, saw my cat starting to climb out the window. And I just, like, instinctively, completely automatically and calmly pulled her in, closed the window, most of the way and went back to sleep as if it was the most normal thing. And this was way before I started studying any of this. And I woke up the next morning and I was kind of like, what the fuck was that? That's weird. Yeah, I have no idea what prompted me to do that. And it was just what was weird was how completely normal it was. Just automatic. Like if, it felt as normal and automatic as if you woke up in the middle of the night and like realized your light was still on, you'd fallen asleep and you just get up, turn it off and go back to sleep. Just I didn't really think about it until I started studying all this stuff and realized I had a lot of weird, not as weird as things started to get when I started studying this, but weird little things along the way.
Well, like you, I mean, I'm guessing prior to me, prior to 2010, I'm sure I've had lots of these little things, but I just dismissed them. They weren't significant enough for the one thing that happened for me to think it was really that unusual, and then time goes on. But when I started paying attention and then added them all up and looked at things in retrospect, I started thinking like, wow, oh, I remember that, then it started coming together and became more significant and meaningful to me. One time if something happened, it's whatever, it's a coincidence. And then but when things start happening over and over, I'll give you an example, like the voice thing. That was significant to me because the emotion tied to it was panic, my dog's going to die, it almost drowned, this thing saved my dog, this voice, right? So I always remember that. And I'm sure I've had little voices here and there, but the other thing that happened that I'll never forget, and it was, again, I felt like it potentially saved my life, was probably in 2015. I would take my boxer for late at night when there weren't cars around in our neighborhood. I would ride him alongside my bike with me, and I would always take the same route because I knew, where the traffic was or wasn't and what routes were safe. So I was riding with him. I mean, we would run. He would, I mean, fast. We were probably going 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. And a voice said to me, don't go straight, turn left. It's that street's creepy. And I don't know where that came from, the word creepy. And I thought I go down past this house all the time. And I don't know where the word creepy came from, but that was the word. Turn left, it's creepy. And I turned left. And as soon as I turned left with him, I heard gunshots. And then a car was sped by with teenagers in it. And I later found out because the police came and the news team came and they wanted to know if there were witnesses. And I happened to be a witness. And some teenagers threw a bunch of eggs at this vet's house. And I guess he was suffering from PTSD. And they kept teasing him and throwing eggs at his house. So he pulled a gun out and shot at these kids. And bullets went across the street to another house. And so I would have driven right with my bike and my dog through there. And there was something like, 6, 7 shots. And I always took the same route. I always took that same, I knew it was like, a couple mile bike ride. And that was it. It was a void. And so that stuck with me because
How did you make sense of that?
I didn't. I just thought, oh, maybe it's like my subconscious. Maybe my subconscious knows something I don't. I couldn't rationalize it. I thought it was a premonition of some sort. Like I knew something was going to happen before I couldn't. The only other thing I think of is, well, maybe my mom's up there. You think maybe my mom's up there looking after me. It wasn't my time, or I don't know.
I mean, even now, I feel like studying all this, I'd be like, that could be so many things. That could be your mom, a grandma, a spirit guide. It could be us, we sense time differently, and we're like time's an illusion and we get subconscious warnings. That I mean, there's just so much. It just does show that our material, very science minded. I hate to say science minded because I think there's so much science minded exploration of this phenomena, but the traditional science minded, it absolutely doesn't fit into that paradigm. It literally does not fit in. If that happened, then the material science minded world is not the full picture.
Well, I call it a 3-dimensional perspective of everything. And there are far more dimensions than 3. They say the 4th dimension's time or something. And then, I mean, try to imagine what a 5th dimension is. We can't comprehend that. So if there are 3 dimensions, why can't there be more? It's just, we can't comprehend that. So if we can't comprehend that, there are many, many things we can't comprehend. Just when I think of, okay, if you travel faster than the speed of sound, you know, it creates that sonic boom. Can you travel so fast that you catch up to the sound, you know, circle back around? Like just that. You know what I'm saying? Like sound is like 720 miles an hour or something. Is that what it is? I don't know, something like that. But if you travel faster than the speed, just that alone is hard for me to comprehend.
And there's so much we just can't comprehend. Like we cannot comprehend the concept of infinity. But I mean, infinity has to exist. I mean, there has to have been something infinitely in the past and something infinitely in the future. And what if you were to travel next to the speed of light? Okay, we accept we can't travel at the speed of light, although that's another conversation if we could in some way. But if we were to travel at almost the speed of light, in one direction for 1 billion years, like what would happen?
Maybe time goes backwards. I don't know. And I know time's man made, but if you're traveling faster than the speed of light does, then time, do you go back in time? There's that whole thing.
But we need to get back to your story because I feel like we both are fascinated by this stuff and could talk for like another hour. And your story is amazing.
Sometimes it gets so overwhelming that it's disturbing and I have to stop because it's unsettling. I just want to go back to just being the old me that just sort of believed in the simple things because it can be too much.
I can relate to that completely. There's so many times I'm like, yeah, my life was easier before all this.
Right, wasn't it? When your head was in the sand?
It was just like lighter and fun. I mean, I had other issues that I felt I was dealing with, and I mean, things weren't perfect, but it was a lighter existence, maybe, or I don't even know the word, just shallower. Which has its negatives and its positives, you know.
Well, like being a child where you're more naive to things, you know. I tell my partner often, I wish I could go back to when I thought all policemen and all doctors and all people of authority were good. You know, when you're a child, you think everybody, and then you realize not everybody is, and everybody's just a bunch of grown up kids with the same problems we all had when we were younger in high school and, you know, just with adult bodies.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know when I'm trying to. I don't remember. I definitely thought adults had a lot more figured out than they do, but I had a lot of like fucked up teachers at my school when I was little. So I didn't have a lot of that idealization because of how poorly my elementary school was run.
Well, that's sad.
It is sad. It's really unfortunate.
That should be a time of bliss for you, right? Elementary school.
It should. It was horrible. I don't think I have one good thing to say about the school.
Oh,
So my first grade teacher and second grade teacher were lovely, but like the ones in the other homeroom were terrible. It was just such a poorly run school. Very, very like shame based and authoritarian.
was
And
this, I was going to say, you're not Catholic, you're Jewish, right? So obviously,
Jewish, atheist. New York private school, it was supposed to be more artsy, and so my parents kept clinging to like its reputation, and
yeah,
it was, I mean, it was sort of like a comedy of errors, you could say, my time there. But it definitely,
wow,
I would classify it as trauma, and definitely like like gave me an insight into that adults are really fucked up and often don't know what they're doing.
wow.
Way too
That was,
young.
yeah, an early
So,
lesson. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't physically abusive, but I think it was very psychologically abusive. So,
Oh, yeah. I think that can be worse. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
because you don't have any evidence. Like, I think if I'd come home and said my teacher, like, hits us, like, I would have been pulled out. But it was like,
right.
it wasn't, it's sometimes you can't define things concretely,
Right.
which is why I believe listen to kids. If they say they're unhappy, they don't like school, they're not just
Right.
like preferring to
Yeah,
play,
no.
like, they mean it.
No, definitely. Emotional abuse, psychological abuse is, yeah.
That's another story. I just
Another story for another time.
Yes, and if anyone who ran that school is listening, fuck you. You get to hear that I hate you. I'm not spiritually evolved enough to not hate the people in charge of what went down there. That's another story. I'm still petty, but yeah, I know what you mean though. There is a time where you still thought there was a certain order, and I feel like that even got more shattered, like even after Trump winning. Like that was another level of, I think, a certain. I never thought things could go that far.
Right, yeah. I think a lot of us feel that way. For me, it was back, I don't know how old you are necessarily, but it was, I think it was in maybe '08 to like 11 when the foreclosure fraud stuff was going on with the banks
Right.
and the subprime mortgage and all this, and how they got away with, Wall Street got away with what they did. And you just, it was sort of a letdown, you would think. I thought that too big to fail, too big to fail. If you have enough money, and it made me just really become disappointed and disillusioned with our justice system in some ways. That, for me, that was like the first kind of disappointment with our system, like real big one. And if you weren't directly affected, you probably, like we were directly affected by it. And so I, did a lot of course, research on it. And it was awful. Yeah, a lot of lives were ruined. Anyway, I think people, all of us in our society, are indirectly affected in some way from that. But anyway, so
So you were saved from running down the alley or the street where the bullets were. And so what was the next thing that happened?
so yes, I was on my bike with him. That's right. The next thing, let's see. So it was the voice thing. So like I said, I didn't think much of hearing a voice or whatever, because I just thought it was my subconscious mind just creating a thought. So our dog almost drowning, and then the bullets, and then the other voice thing that I remember that was significant was I was laying the sod. I think I was telling you I was laying sod in our yard like in 2012. And so these things all happen within like 3 years, 4 years of each other, these voice things. And I, the name, again, I know when it's not my own thought. I'm not crazy. I know I didn't produce this thought or this voice. And I can never tell if it's male or female. And it's just this kind of androgynous voice. And the name Sharon was, again, it's like a shout. It sounds like this: Sharon, or hot tub. That's how it sounds in my head. And I thought that's weird. And I knew the Sharon that was being yelled in my head was my dad's childhood friend who lived next door to him back in Illinois. And so she would have been in her 70s, like my dad at the time. And I thought that's weird. Why am I thinking about her? Like, I haven't seen her in years. And my dad and I were sort of estranged at that time, so I hadn't gone back to visit. And I found out later that she had just died.
That day.
I don't know if it was that day, like just a couple of days before. She actually committed suicide in her garage, and my dad was next door, and it was very traumatic. So I wouldn't have thought of her. I just don't think of his childhood friends. And so that was another significant thing. It was like, what was that? Why did her name come into my head? So that was sort of my voice. And I'm sure other things have happened over the years, but I didn't think anything of it. You know, didn't think anything of it. But those three things really made an impression on me. So, like I said, all these things, when I look back or write them down, add up to something bigger. But any one thing wasn't that significant to me to like change my opinion on something.
I guess your dad passed and that made you want to look into it further.
My dad passed just at the end of 19. So I was well on my way to believing that our consciousness survives our bodies by the time my dad died. I'll tell you the main thing that really, like, no pun intended, put the nail in the coffin. It was, let's see, it was the summer of, let me think about this, 2013. I went to go get some ice cream with my partner, and it was to Salt and Straw. I remember this. And we were waiting in line. It was hot. It was like August. And we're standing in line waiting. And my partner said, "Oh my God, I think that's your ex." And I looked, and it was an ex of mine from 15 years prior, 16 years prior. I was probably in my, yeah, I was in my 40s then. It was a little awkward because I'd been with my partner for, at that time, like 15 years, and she knew who she was. And so we all just sort of chatted, and she had told me, I hadn't seen her in 15 years. I never ran into her. This is the first time I saw her in 15 years. And she looked exactly the same pretty much, and she proceeded to tell me that she had stage 4 colon cancer. And I I just broke out crying. I couldn't believe it because I had just survived breast cancer myself. And I had that in my 30s, and she was diagnosed with her colon cancer at 39, I think it was. And this is a person that like ran marathons and was really athletic and no family history of it, and she was very fit her whole life and still looked fit, and I just couldn't wrap my head around that. Like, how could this happen to you, you know? So I knew she was going to die, and it just, like, I just spiraled, into this, like, I'd never been that close to somebody that was so close to my age that this happened to. So she married and had children, so we just sort of went on our way, and I didn't, it was so awkward. We just kind of gave each other a hug and went on our way. But I knew she could die in a couple months or a year. I had no idea, but she was just determined she was going to beat this thing. And I knew, when you have stage 4 colon cancer, it's not the greatest prognosis. So I would check, like every 3 or 4 months, I would check the obituaries. And it was just, heartbreaking to do this, but I would do that, like I said, every 3 or 4 months. Well, and so that I ran into her in 13, and early 15, I decided to check, and she had passed. And she had passed in September of 2014. So she lived about a year and a month after I saw her, right, that day. And I was just a wreck, just because it made me think of my own mortality more. Like, I survived my breast cancer and she didn't survive her cancer. And we were both in our 30s when this happened, and like no family histories. And it just, I went down the rabbit hole. And I remember I got out all the old letters, and all that sort of stuff, and was just sort of reading the letters. And I remember looking up at my ceiling and saying, I don't want to say her name, but I said, okay, you have to tell me if there's life after death. If you can hear me, you need to give me a concrete sign that I will recognize, not some sort of, feather on the ground or whatever. Like, I want something that is going to rock my world. Okay. So I had said this, to her, and I don't know, maybe 2, 3 weeks went by, and I had forgotten I even said this, because time went on and I just got on with my life, and I was feeling a little better about things. Well, what happened, okay, was I was sleeping, and I'm the type of person, I guess, who's very fortunate. I sleep very soundly and nothing wakes me up. Um, I have to have like 2 alarm clocks to wake me up. And this particular night, I was woken up in the middle of the night, and I was in a lucid state. I wasn't completely awake, but I had a voice telling me to write down a phone number in the middle of the night. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm so tired that, like, just I felt like I was in molasses, but I managed to grab the pen and paper next to my bed, and I scribbled this phone number down, which when I woke up, I didn't remember doing this. It felt like it was part of my dream or in my dream. And I woke up in the morning and I looked over and I said to my partner, I said, do you know what is this phone number? It's obviously my writing. I don't remember writing that. And then I remembered it sort of in the middle of the night. There was a voice telling me that it was important. I remember the word important. Write down the phone number. So I called the phone number, right? And it was her voicemail with her voice on it.
Your ex's voicemail.
Yes, which she had died like 6 months earlier. I'd never had that phone number. It was a cell phone, apparently.
And not the cell phone she had when you were a couple.
Well, when we were a couple in the 90s, we didn't have cell phones. So this was the other thing. So it was just, and so I'm thinking her husband, it was a phone number I never knew. I never called her. We hadn't seen, hadn't seen each other for the 15 years. I mean, I turned white. I turned white. I thought, and then I had remembered like 3 or 4 weeks earlier, me asking for a concrete sign. That did it for me, because where did that come from? Unless, how did my mind get a phone number that I never had in my life, right? And so that was the most concrete thing that ever happened to me. I've heard other people say things like this, and I thought, okay, until it happens to me, it's still not going to be that meaningful to me when I hear other people's stories. But when it happens to you, and it it it's different. It's different.
But I don't know. There's some physical, almost like you feel, at least I felt when I've gotten really evidential signs, almost like I feel like waves or just this weird sort of not a typical feeling I have when I walk around. Not only just shock, it's some weird, like meditative wavy feeling. Almost maybe that's what like quote unquote connecting with the other side is.
Right.
Or I don't know. I absolutely love that story. What did you even say? I just can't even imagine. Like, did you tell your current partner?
Oh, of course I did.
Of course, I'm
I
sure
was
she
like,
must.
holy shit. And she's Jewish, grew up, her parents are atheist, none of this. And so she and I have been on this journey together because, I talked to her about everything. And she was there the day we ran into her. And I mean, it was as significant for my partner as me, because she knows how I sleep. And where would I've gotten that number? And the fact that it came to me at night like that, and like the whole thing. So that was, like I said, she died the end of 14, and that happened in early 15. That's when all the other weird, like, it just started, more other things started happening that I can't explain. And so here I am today, and that's how I found you.
What's another weird thing that happened after that? You said all these weird stuff started happening.
So let's see. This probably happened to me more than I realized, but I didn't take notice of it. And it's going to sound weird. Have you ever heard of like the 111, 1111 stuff, where people see that and they like over and over and over again?
Yeah, like it's supposed to be a significant number. Like people use it as a sign or. Mhm.
Like spirit is drawing your attention to these numbers, because when you see like a couple, like 11, 15, that's not going to draw your attention. If you see multiple numbers together, it would draw your attention more. So I had never heard of this. I had never heard of this until it happened to me, and I Googled it, right? Again, I was doing a lot of like soul searching, and just really allowing myself to just be more receptive to things. And I was in my car one night, and I remember I had just taken my dog for a walk. He was with me. We went to, it doesn't matter, I went to walking at Reed College, and it was late at night. And I remember driving home, and I had my phone on the car seat, locked and charging. I was driving home, and all of a sudden my stereo turned on the car, and was blasting a song from my phone. So the phone unlocked itself, turned itself on, and started playing a song called Burning Down the House by the Talking Heads. And the phone flashed 1111 on it. And I thought, wow, that's weird. And prior to that, I had seen these 1111s happening, but this was significant because my phone turned itself on, unlocked itself, and started playing a song. And on the radio, it said 1111. On my phone, it said 1111. And I remember telling my partner about that, because this had happened one other time at 111 when I was driving. The phone turned itself on and started playing a song. It unlocked itself. You have to have a passcode, and it flashed 111 on the phone. So
And what song did it play that time? The 111.
it was the same song. And I thought, okay, well, I looked at my song. I didn't have a lot of songs on there, but Burning Down the House was my first song because it started with a B. So I thought, okay, so it's just opening an app or doing something and just playing the first song. So I rationalized it like that. But then I thought, Well, that still it turned itself on at a specific time both times, right? Well, I had written my partner, I stopped the car and I wrote her, I said, "Oh my God, that 11:11 thing happened again." I texted that to her. Well, I don't know if it was probably weeks later. I was going through my texts and I was deleting texts. And I went to that one and I was about to delete it. And I hadn't noticed at the time the day that happened was on November 11th at 11:11. So it was 11:11:11:11 that thing happened. The 11:11 thing happened.
That the phone unlocked and was playing Burning Down the House.
Yes. So another time this happened, again, I had seen things on the clock, but thought whatever. Like I was starting to see this all the time, and I started thinking I'm going a little crazy. Like, why am I seeing these numbers all the time on the clock? Every time I look at the digital clock, it says that. Like when I glance up. And if you do probabilities and you take the number of minutes in the day and you divide it, I think there's like 2,400 minutes. Is that right? In a day? And if you glance at the clock, so the probability is not very high that you this would happen. But so when it's tied to something like your electronics going nutty, like my camera did, it starts to have more meaning. So another time I was actually visiting my father and I was reading something on my phone to him and my phone just shut off while I was reading and I thought, "Oh, my battery must be dead. It just closed itself down." But then it started itself back up. It takes a little while, and then a little Apple icon shows up on there and then the time flashes. It did this and it turned itself off and back on at 1:11 and I had a full battery. So another time this happened because I started writing it down every time something like this would happen. And so, like I said, one time, so what, two times, so what, but then I have a list of 10, 15 times.
That your phone would shut off and turn on at 11:11 or 1:11.
Yes, or something would happen at that time. Like for example, I was at the gym. This was a couple years ago before COVID, and I was listening to a podcast on the bike, and my phone shut itself off and turned itself off in the middle of the podcast. And I thought, God, what is going on with my phone? It turned itself back on at 1:11, and I remember looking up and it said I had burned 111 calories. You know how the thing says that? So it was 111 calories at 1:11, and the podcast turns itself off and turns itself back on.
That, I mean, one time's a coincidence, but these multiple times, and this is the only times it's happening. It's always tied into 1:11.
Yes. Right. So my phone does not, I like if it turned off another time, at 12:30 or whatever, but it doesn't do that. It doesn't ever do that. It doesn't just turn itself off and turn itself back on. The only times it's ever happened are at those times. So it started really getting my attention. So I Googled, why do I keep seeing 1:11? Why do I keep seeing 1:11? And you can just dive into that and see. It's like supposed to be the veil is thinning, you're having a spiritual awakening, you're more receptive to, so I don't know what else to say about that except for it seems like more than coincidence.
When something keeps happening beyond the odds, it's worth considering, really strongly considering. I mean, it's just a weird thing.
Right. And I'm not the only one. Like I had never heard of this 111 stuff until I then Googled it and saw that I'm not the only person this is happening to.
I mean, those are all really amazing stories, all really transformative. And I mean, really, the culmination is what happened with your ex with the phone. That's one of the most incredibly evidential stories I've heard.
And specifically asking for something concrete and not like a feather or a bird showing up at my window or whatever you want to, I've heard of these things and I thought, I always brush those off too. Well, there are a lot of feathers around. There are a lot of you can always talk yourself out of it and just so it's a coincidence, but I can't say that could have ever been there's no way to say that's a coincidence.
The odds of guessing how many numbers are there in a phone number? 9 numbers. And I mean, hearing in a dream, I mean, you could guess. I mean, it would just be interesting at some point to do the statistics of what are the odds of correctly guessing a number, just out of curiosity to get those statistics. But it's infinitesimal. I mean, it's not possible.
Right.
Probably if you challenged everybody in the whole world, like had one phone number planned and everybody in the whole world to guess it, probably coincidentally one person out of all the billions of people would get it, is my guess. It's probably one in billions, if even. I mean, maybe one in trillions.
Oh, you did ask. You asked if there was a significant book or anything I read, or there was one, and my sister actually gave it to me. I think it was around Christmas of 14. So I was reading it at the time. I found out my ex had died, and it was called Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander. He's the neurosurgeon. He had went into a coma, right, and had a near death experience, and he's a brain surgeon, and that was really significant, that book. And then of course he's been on a lot of interviews and on YouTube, and so I started listening to him a bit, and that was another, because he's so science minded and didn't believe in any of this at all because he studied the brain. um, his near death experience completely changed his mind, and anybody that's interested, I'd recommend reading that book and looking into him. So that was one definitely that had an influence on me. And again, I that book was I read it right when all this was happening, and it was interesting that my sister, she's a school teacher, and she picked this book up at a book fair and just happened to just well, she actually gave it to my partner for Christmas, and I ended up taking it, reading it. So I thought that was interesting, the timing of that, because she's never given us a book before, and the fact that she chose that one at her children's book fair.
Yeah, you've really, some of your stories, that phone number story is amazing. So I think everyone's going to appreciate hearing it. So thank you for sharing everything.
And I would be interested to hear if you have anyone else that's ever had like that sort of thing happen, where a phone number or something came to them in a dream.
Yes, if any of you have had something like that, either email me and I'll have you on the podcast, or comment on wherever this is posted. But I would love to have you on, share that story. That would be such, I mean, it's just so cool. I am curious if anyone's had that, because I've never had anything like that. So I've had some evidence, but that's up there.
Yeah, maybe it's as simple as asking, you shall receive, because I asked. you know
I mean, I ask for so much evidence all the time. I get some, I've gotten some amazing. So yeah, anyone who's had that or something similar, maybe someone who gave you like a combination lock or an answer to something you'd been trying to figure out, an address, like a combination to a combination lock. I don't know, something.
Speaking of that, you said a combination.
Do you've got a combination lock too?
Well, I don't know. Like, this doesn't happen to me very often, but because I'm such a sound sleeper, but I woke up, I don't know, maybe it was like 3 weeks ago, and the number woke me up. And the number was 631112. And it just woke me up. And I'm thinking, do I know anybody born then? What was this? And it was the day after 11/11 that this number came to me, which was interesting. It was that night that I went to bed on November 11th.
6 3 11 12. I'm just writing it down because you don't know what it is, do you?
No, I have no idea. So I wrote it down, and I'm just going to keep it with me. But it was the voice, not my voice. It was just the voice. And I woke up with my eyes wide open, and I 6 3 11 12. I don't know what that means, but it was the night I went to bed on 11/11. So it was that morning that happened.
Well, I wrote it down. So I'm curious. I'll see. I wrote it too. I'm just was like, do I recognize it as anything? Since you felt compelled to share it here, but I have no idea. I'll think if it does. I'll let you know. If any of you recognize that number as some major thing, let us know too. Maybe there's a reason Krista was supposed to say it now.
Yeah, maybe so. I'm going to say one last thing. So that 11/11 stuff was all in like 2016, 17 ish, 18, and now and then I'll see it, but nothing significant like that happens until you had mentioned this, the date of
I am blocking out the date so it can stay evidential for medium readings.
was significant to you, and you had asked me if anything, if that means anything to me, and I said no, I don't. I'll have to think about it. And I remember like a week later I wrote you, because I had remembered, I wrote down that this another one of those 111 things happened to me, and they hadn't for a couple years, and like where an electronic device was tied into it. And I was on 2021, And I remember Jimmy Kimmel was on the television, and I was on the couch, actually watching a YouTube video on my phone about a topic called twin flames, which people can look that up if they want. So I was watching this video, and all of a sudden, the television just turned itself off and started flashing black and white, black and white, black and white. And I thought, oh, that's where my dog must be laying on the remote, right? So I went to see if he was laying on the remote, and it wasn't. The remote was sitting on the armrest of the couch, and the television stopped and turned itself back on, and it was on channel 111.
Weird. And this happened at 11:11 or just a different time?
No, it was like at 11:45 or something.
Yeah, but it was at the channel was 111.
There are like 2,000 channels on DirecTV or something crazy like that, and I think Jimmy Kimmel's like on channel 2 or channel 6, one of the lower channels. But it just the TV went berserk, and then it stopped in channel 111, and it was like a Chuck Norris exercise promotional video or something like this. How does that happen? And I didn't do it. My dog didn't do it. How did that happen? So that was the most recent one, but it was on the day that you had asked me if it's significant. So
And that was a fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for listening. If any of you have any major what the fucks, reach out. I'd love to have you on, possibly. So thanks for listening. Get more information on what the fuck just happened. To pre-order my book, WTF Just Happened, a sciencey skeptic explores grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife, where I share all about the early stages of my grief, how I came to conclude there most likely is an afterlife, and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way, and read about how much I harassed them trying to get evidence, see if they were cheating. Go to WTFJustHappened.net. Check us out and subscribe to our newsletter. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if you've had any crazy what the fucks yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hi, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?